thank you all for coming. I'm very excited to have Risa here for our second lecture of this season. This is in conjunction with our show, Beta Israel, Ethiopian Jews in the Promised Land. I moved to Atlanta partly because I knew it was an incredible place for civil and human rights. And my name is Elizabeth Peterson. I'm the director of the museum, and I curated the show. And I have a passionate interest in immigration as well. My son was born in Ethiopia. So this is near and dear to my heart to have you all here. And I'm very excited to introduce Paedia, who most of you know already, I can see, Paedia Mixon and Safia Jama to talk about Risa and immigration in Atlanta. Thanks.
Well, I thank you all for coming. My name is Paedia Mixon. I'm the executive director of Risa. We're a refugee resettlement and service program located in Atlanta. And this is Safia Jama. She is our resettlement manager at Risa. And we're going to talk a little bit tonight about the Horn of Africa as a region and the humanitarian crisis, refugee crisis in the Horn of Africa, and how and the role of refugee resettlement in finding a durable solution to a long-term humanitarian crisis. So just to get started, I thought I would share with you all how I got involved with working with refugees in Atlanta, because I'm celebrating a little bit of an anniversary myself. It was 15 years ago that I met my very first refugee family. I was matched as a family friend volunteer with Catholic Charities actually matched me with this family, and it was a Somali family. And I went to their house every Wednesday night after 902 was over, because they loved that show. And I taught English to the women, not only in that family, but when I would come over, the neighbors would come over, and we would do English classes. You know, I started out thinking that I was going to teach this family something, and I hope that I did. But at the end of the day, I was the one who learned something. They were a really incredible family, resilient, creative, positive, grateful, and for a cynical college student, which is what I was at the time, it really renewed my my faith in my country and my faith in the human spirit. And it was a life-changing experience, and I've been working with refugees ever since. It's a little bittersweet to talk about the Horn of Africa, because the family I worked with 15 years ago was fleeing from the same conditions that Somali refugees are fleeing from today, and it's very tragic that things haven't improved more in that part of the world. Risa is still bringing Somali refugees in, and unfortunately it looks like we will be continuing to do so for quite a while. So I'm going to give Safia a little chance to talk, introduce herself, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the Horn of Africa, where refugees are fleeing from, where they're fleeing to, what are some of the challenges to housing refugees in that part of the world, and then talk a little bit about resettlement here and how it works, and what part it plays in creating a durable solution for a small number of refugees from the Horn of Africa. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to Safia.
I am a refugee from Somalia, so I have been a refugee for the last 20 years. I left my country in 1990. I went to Kenya, which is the nearest country to my neighbor country, and then I came to America after 9 years in Kenya. And the reason I do and I love to help others is I have been there, I know what the needs are, and I am doing it from my heart because I know what these people went through, what they are going through being here. So I'm one of them. And what's better than to welcome somebody who you know what they need, what their needs are. And Risa gave me the opportunity to serve them. my religion also, requires that I help others. So my upbringing as a Muslim, I was told that my mother told me that when you wake up in the morning, you can't make pancakes only for your family. You have to go and see if your neighbors are fed and they have food. So that is the, that is I got from my mother and my upbringing and what I went through. I enjoy doing it.
She also feeds us in the office as well. Okay, I'm going to try and... okay. So when we're talking about a refugee, this is the United Nations definition of a refugee. It's a person who's fled his or her country and is unable to return. Fear of persecution on the basis of one of these 5 areas. And that's the United Nations definition of a refugee. Unless the situation changes in the country that they're fled, refugees can't return, and they must try to find a permanent place to be. So, talk a little bit about the refugees in the Horn of Africa. When we talk about Horn of Africa, you want to take over?
Well, yes, there are refugees in the Horn of Africa. Refugees are coming from Somalia, Sudan, Eritrea, and a very small amount from Ethiopia. Most of them are fleeing from persecution, and the hosting countries are mostly Kenya. We have the biggest camp in the world in Kenya, and 70% of those are Somalis.
Yes.
It's the biggest population. It's not safe, and was the same thing, not as easy as it was, like when I was coming here. Yeah.
Yeah, and so if you think about Somali refugees, I mean, we're talking about more than 1 million people coming from Somalia. We're talking about from Sudan, more than 500,000 refugees who fled those countries and are living outside in a temporary situation. Another big refugee producer in the Horn of Africa right now is Eritrea. So those are the big Horn of Africa countries that refugees are fleeing. You'll notice, little to no refugees from Kenya, but we still see refugees fleeing Ethiopia, but that number has decreased dramatically over the years. And then if you look at where are the refugees going, looking at Kenya and Ethiopia, Kenya has the world's 2 largest refugee camps, Dadaab and Kakuma. Ethiopia's refugee population has doubled in the last 2 years. So they have, in the area of Dalo Ado, where most of the refugee camps are, they have 5 active camps right now and are building a 6th. So the mass influx of refugees coming into these countries creates instability in the countries and is a real challenge for countries that are already stretched thin to house them and provide humanitarian support. So a little bit about the countries where refugees are coming in. Safia's an expert. I have to, speak about this, and Safia starts telling me, adding things, so I'm going to let her add in here. But Somalia, after the ousting of Sayed Barre's military regime in 1991, Somalia has been entrenched in civil war ever since. It's 20+ years.
Actually, it started in 1988. Most of the Somalis in the northern part fled to Ethiopia. More than 50,000 were killed in 3 days. And then they stayed in Ethiopia. There was none of those people were resettled in another area. They just stayed there. And then the war started in the southern part of Somalia, and people fled to Kenya. Since northern part of Somalia and central part of Somalia, since Siad Barre left power, they went back and repatriated by the United Nations back to their side of the country, like in the northern part of Somalia and central part of Somalia. But the south are the majority of the Somalis, and they are still in limbo and in camps. in Ethiopia and in Kenya. Some of the younger people are running, are going to Sudan, and Sudan to Libya, and Libya to Italy, and every few months you would hear that a full boat of Somalis are drowned in somewhere in the ocean. So it's unfortunate, younger, you know, if you are young, you just want to take the risk and go, but families stay forever in those camps. And some of the families that we are bringing are almost born there. Like most of the young people coming are born in 1990, so they were born in that camp and stayed there all their life until they come to America or other countries. Sudan are the Darfurians, are the people who are persecuted at the moment. Southern Sudan is stable compared to, you know, what it was years when we were resettling the lost boys of Sudan. So most of the Sudanese are the Darfurians. So they are in charge, and they are, the government is paying child government not to let any of those people to go. So processing is difficult. They are stuck there. We cannot bring anybody from that area.
So refugees coming from Sudan now are refugees that fled to other parts of the world from the conflict between the North and the South and have been living in camps for a long time. So we are receiving Sudanese refugees. A lot of people read about Darfur and they say, you know, I've had churches say, we want to work with a Darfurian family, or we want to help Darfurian families, but many of those Darfurian families coming out of Western Sudan are stuck in Chad, and our government can't get to them to process them and bring them here.
The other group that we are as Eritreans, and there is a dictator in Eritrea. Young people are forced to join the military with minimum wage and hardship. And they, if you refuse to be there, then they will persecute you and you could go to jail. So young people are running, including minors. And this is one of the countries that you hardly see a Somali and a converted minor, but there are a lot of young children leaving the country because they are afraid to be in the same situation as their brothers and siblings. So they are looking for their, you know, siblings in Ethiopia.
Most of the Eritreans were resettling or coming alone. Yeah. Single individuals who don't have family here, and they traveled all by themselves, and that's why.
And there are some of these Eritreans are going to Sudan and Egypt and then to Israel, and they are, you know, victims of the Bedouins in the middle and caught and, you know, tortured and are in a worse, you know, place.
So Kenya has a long history of welcoming refugees in for over 40 years. Initially, it was refugees from Uganda in the 70s. But before the 1990s, Kenya was welcoming in about 15,000 refugees in a year. Right now, Kenya is hosting over 500,000. So it really has seen a massive increase in refugees coming into Kenya in the last 2 decades. And Kenya lives in a rough neighborhood. There's conflict all around them, so they're resettling refugees from Sudan, not resettling, but serving refugees from Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Rwanda, Burundi, Congo. And over time, it's starting to take a toll on Kenya. Kenya is having its own political instability, and some of these camps are really overcrowded. So Dadaab refugee camp was initially built to serve it was built to serve 90,000 people, and when it was shut down to our government and to Humanitarian Service agencies in 2011, there were 500,000 people there. So overcrowded conditions, unsafe, the humanitarian workers have been kidnapped. It's a real tragedy, and our government is trying to figure out ways to get refugees out of Dadaab. We have a program now where we're transporting refugees from Dadaab to Kakuma so they can be processed out. So these are people that have been accepted to come to the U.S. but can't get out of Dadaab. So these refugee camps in Kenya have become difficult places, and there is definitely a humanitarian fatigue in Kenya right now. You're starting to see the government rounding up Somalis that are living in urban areas and detaining them, or sending them back to refugee camps, and a lot of pressure on Somalis to repatriate back to Somalia. Ethiopia is to see this massive expansion of the refugee program, partly because the conditions in Kenya aren't as good as they were, and partly because so many people are fleeing from neighboring Eritrea. You just see, you know, a big growth in refugees fleeing to Ethiopia. Now Ethiopia is home to the 3rd largest refugee camp in the world. So that's kind of a little bit about the Horn of Africa and what's going on there. It's difficult, and repatriation to safe return is not really an option for many of the refugees in this part of the world. So talk a little bit about durable solutions for refugees. So, you know, refugees are fleeing their home, they can't return. What's the solution to this situation? So the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, it's part of their mandate to provide humanitarian support, but also to look for a durable solution for refugees. And they really have 3 options, and this is in the order of preference, usually for the United Nations, but mostly for the refugees themselves. A safe return home is what most refugees want. That's where they want to go. That's their culture, that's their language, that's their history. Acquisition of a permanent status in that first country that they flee to, you know, so to go to Kenya and to be able to become a permanent resident of Kenya would be a second choice. I mean, that's usually the country they flee to is on the border. It's culturally similar. And then the 3rd choice is resettlement in a 3rd country in the United States. And it's always looked at it that that's the 3rd choice. So we're looking at those refugees who've been living in a protracted refugee situation for 5 years or more. And that's why people always ask me when a conflict is on the news, are you getting Syrian refugees, is a question I'm getting now. And we're not, because you know, we don't know what's going to happen there, and the hope is that they'll be able to return safely as that conflict, you know, drags on. Then we might begin to see them. So that's kind of how that works. So looking at durable solutions for the Horn of Africa, it's almost impossible to get numbers on people that actually stay in that country, the first country that they go into in Kenya. But we do have some numbers on refugees who are returning home. So in 2012, there were 50,000 refugees who safely returned home in the Horn of Africa. And as you can see, the vast majority of those were Sudanese. Somalis really aren't returning home. We've had some Ethiopians return home. Eritreans are not. So it's really a protracted situation in those countries. In 2010, which is the last period where there was good data and the data wasn't 100%, about 10,000 refugees from the Horn of Africa were resettled in a 3rd country. That is combined, the United States, Europe, Australia, all the resettlement countries. So it is a small, compared to the population, it's small. It's less than 1%. But what does resettlement in the United States look like? So our program, the way it looks today, I mean, we've been resettling refugees in the U.S. for a long time, but resettling the way it's resettled today started when the Refugee Act was passed in 1980, and that created our current program. And in that program, the President of the United States every October sets a number. It's called the presidential determination, and that's the ceiling. That's the maximum number of refugees that can be resettled in the United States. This year it's 70,000. So he sets that ceiling, and actually, while we're waiting for him to set that ceiling, that's the only, other than the week right after Christmas, that's the only week we have off all year for refugee resettlement. So we try to do everything in that week. Once you hit that number, then Congress passes the budget, and they kind of determine numbers from, like, target numbers from each region. The U.S. Department of State contracts with 10 agencies nationally, and those national agencies have affiliates all over the United States. So we're affiliated with 2 of those. We're affiliated with Church World Service and Episcopal Migration Ministries. When a refugee is approved to come to the United States, then their information goes to those 10 national agencies, and they have a meeting every Wednesday where they kind of take their caseload, and then we get contacted. We'll get an email. We'll start to see bios. If we accept the bio and that person is going to come through us, they might come in a month. They might come in a year. So we
might come in 4 years.
Yeah. So we're just waiting, and we don't know until we get their confirmation on a plane. Yeah. What is it? How many weeks now a notice are we getting?
Maybe 2 weeks. I got an arrival for somebody who's coming on the 16th of March yesterday, so it's 2 weeks plus or minus. We get an information that that family will come on this and this date. Then we look for housing for the families, or contact churches if they are willing to co-sponsor. And we get ready and secure a house, get the apartment, put furniture, ready to eat food when they arrive, and their ethnic, we do groceries and put all the furniture and everything the family needs. Meet the family at the airport. Somebody who speaks the language welcomes them at the airport, take them to their apartment, give them orientation, how to use. Some people came from the remotest villages and don't know how to use most of the appliances here, so we show them how to use them, appliances and things, and emergency contact numbers to call in case of an emergency. And we do cultural orientation, tell them what they can and cannot do to the law of the country, how to take the bus, how to go to school, how to do grocery. We teach them everything. Take them Social Security, sign them up for food stamps and Medicaid. We don't encourage our clients to get cash assistance. We want them to be self-sufficient as soon as possible, which is 120 days. The State Department say that these people should be working by 90 days or 120 days. So we find jobs for them. I think Georgia is one of the highest, we have the highest employed refugees in the States. People get jobs easily. People in Georgia are friendly. Southern hospitality, that's why I'm here. And we import children in schools, and adults ESL, the community help us, like
we see here, yeah, we have some co-sponsors and volunteers in our audience.
Yeah. So that's what we do with the families, and find them safe, secure environment.
And one of the questions I get the most is, how do they get here? This is a simplified chart. There's a lot of things that happen in between those little rungs in the chart. But when a refugee flees their country, the first thing they do is they register with the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. And then they're often put in a camp, but more and more today, and this is not necessarily true of refugees coming from Kenya and Ethiopia, but in a lot of places, about half of the refugees in the world today are actually not living in a camp at all. They're living in urban centers, which has its advantages and disadvantages, but it's something that's changing and something we're learning as we're resettling new refugee groups. There's new challenges. We used to have isolation challenges, now we're having urban challenges, and it's a totally a new thing for us. But after they register with the UNHCR, if they're referred to resettlement in the U.S., then the U.S. Resettlement Center creates a file for them. USCIS works with the State Department to conduct interviews. They conduct interviews at the camps in some countries, but they also they travel around from place to place. So they have I think there's in the Horn of Africa, they're in Nairobi. but they do circuit rides. So that would serve people coming from Congo, people in Sudan, people in Ethiopia. They travel around. And once somebody's gone through this interview process, then their case is approved, and the State Department then submits it to the national organizations, and that's when they contact us. But while that's happening, they're not done yet. I mean, there are 13 steps between being approved and getting on a plane. 2 security screenings, a health screening, cultural orientation. They secure a travel loan. So they have to pay back the money for their ticket. And you know, once they get through all that, then they get on the plane and they come here. The resettlement program is a public-private partnership. We couldn't do it alone. We're not funded to do it alone. So we really rely on support from the community to help us welcome families, mentor families, and get them to self-sufficiency. And early self-sufficiency is really the goal of our program. So we're looking at Horn of Africa refugees. How many are coming to the United States? You see this chart looks kind of wild. There's a huge dip in 2002. That's because after September 11th, 2001, the refugee program was almost shut down temporarily. And then there was a backlog, so it shot straight up in 2004. But you kind of see an up and down in Horn of Africa refugees now. But it's hovering, you know, in between 5,000 and 10,000 right now per year coming to the United States. This is from Somalia, Sudan, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. And so where does Georgia come in? These are some of our beautiful clients. So Georgia is home to 6 resettlement agencies. We're one of 6. The other ones are listed up there. And one thing we're really proud of here in Georgia is that we are tied with Texas for the highest early self-sufficiency rate in the United States. 80% of refugees in Georgia are working and paying their own bills from wages earned within 180 days of getting off the airplane, which is an amazing accomplishment. And you know, we have a highly motivated group of people that we serve. We also partner with over 200 Georgia employers. And if you look, Horn of Africa refugees are 2 of the largest populations that are being resettled in Georgia right now, right under Burmese and Bhutanese, Somali and Eritrean. We're not seeing as many Sudanese refugees lately, and I think it's because there aren't as many coming from southern Sudan, and the Darfurian refugees, like we said, are stuck. Some are getting out through Romania.
And Tunisia, because they were in Libya, and then they are in a camp in Tunisia, so they are processed from Tunisia.
And then there's a special kind of emergency processing center in Romania. So some people are quickly flown to Romania for emergency processing when they can get out.
Especially those who are in Egypt, in those Arab Spring situation like Syria, no, what was it? Egypt and Libya are flown to that. And Iraq, because there are a lot of Palestinians also in Iraq who are going to communities.
That's an interesting model and something that the State Department is kind of, it's been experimental for a couple of years of setting up these emergency processing centers. So these are Horn of Africa refugees coming to Georgia over the last 10 years, and it's sort of fluctuated up and down. But the last 4 years, you see 300 to 400 Horn of Africa refugees coming to Georgia. You know, we talked about some of the program successes for Georgia. The Refugee Resettlement Program is the U.S. government provides a great deal of support to make sure that refugees are adjusting well and aren't a burden on their new communities. So they bring with them over $25 million in private and federal investment in Georgia communities. I keep saying, did you know that 80% of our refugees are self-sufficient? You know,
why do you think that is?
I think there's a couple of things. We have some some industries in Georgia that really like to hire refugees, and refugees do quite well. Food processing, poultry is a big employer of refugees. The hospitality industry is a big employer of refugees. I mean, if we look at Georgia's tied with Texas, we have a lot of similar industries as Texas that are hiring refugees. So I think our industries. I also think Georgia is there isn't a big social safety net in Georgia, so there's not a lot of incentive to be on public assistance here. I mean, you work or you don't do very well. So I think people are highly motivated to start working very early on. But I think it's the industries. And the other thing about Georgia is we've had a resettlement program for over 30 years here. So there's a rich community here of people who came before you that are very interested in helping the new arrivals and helping people find jobs. So we have, just the other day, a Bosnian refugee opened a company that placed, and he came as a refugee a long time ago, he's a citizen now, but opened a company that does, tries to place for elderly immigrants and refugees, tries to place somebody that speaks their language in the home for certified nursing care, and only hires newly arrived refugees. So it's this, he came as a refugee, he's been very successful, so he wants to give back. And I think that's another part of why it works well in Georgia. Another reason why I think refugee resettlement is so successful in Georgia is because of our faith community here. We have a very, very strong faith community. Not just a Christian faith community, but a Jewish faith community. We have quite a few synagogues that are involved. We have mosques that are also involved and very supportive of refugees and helping refugees adjust. So I think those are the reasons to me that it's successful. Refugees are eligible to apply for citizenship at 5 years, and most of the resettlement agencies in Georgia have an immigration department that help them. Yes, Safia passed her citizenship exam.
I've been here 13 years. I was afraid I would fail, so I did not do the test. When all my clients became citizens, and I say, I'm not a citizen, they look at me and like, what's wrong with you? So I decided to do it. So I might be an American citizen soon.
Very soon, yeah. Right? Maybe next couple of weeks. So those are some of the successes. Some of the challenges that we face here in Georgia are we do have an anti-immigrant political environment in Georgia, and it's we've passed anti-immigrant legislation here in the state, but we also our state government actually wants to. They want to see a decrease in refugee arrivals in Georgia. They've been advocating for a decrease, and the State Department actually cut our arrivals by 20% this year. Additionally, these other problems to me, these are Georgia problems. They're refugee problems, but they're Georgia problems. A lack of adequate mental health services, a weak social safety net for those who need it, and lack of public transportation outside the perimeter, and decreasing availability of public transportation inside the perimeter. And then, this is although we do raise, and are trying to increase that portion every year, we do raise private funding. This program is primarily a government-funded program. It's a very volatile funding environment. I mean, we were talking about sequestration today. We don't know how that will affect us. The Congress keeps taking us right to the edge, and then that funding environment makes it difficult to plan for the future, makes it a little bit difficult to run the program. But I think the Horn of Africa community in Atlanta has been very successful, and we have 20 years.
You should come to Clarkston and have food there. We have restaurants and businesses, and contributing to the community and bringing a lot of new positive environment to the community. Clarkston was not safe when I first came. I was in an apartment complex that I was afraid to go out with my kids, especially I had young girls, and I was really concerned their safety. And now, you know, it's safe. Most of the people there are immigrants and hardworking, tax-paying. We want to be part of the melting pot of America. You know, your ancestors came not long ago, and we just came now. So we expect people to welcome us. We are not bad. We don't mind.
We were talking before. We were trying to think of like clients that we have in the last couple of years, and we were trying to name all the Ethiopian, Somali, and Eritrean restaurants that have propped up. But it's lots of different stores. And in Clarkston, there's Somali Plaza, which is two kind of mini malls where Somalis
buy
anything.
Anything and everything you want.
You can have halal pizza and coffee and
Sambusa.
sambusa. And
Sambusa, that is the best thing that you have to try and come and taste the sambusa. It's not like the farmer's market one, it's special. You know, I remember my first, one of my first cases was an Eritrean, 3 guys, brothers, and I met them at the airport. We took them to their home. Within 3 months, they were working. One of them has a huge restaurant in Clarkston. Sane and I are regulars there. Reem restaurant. It has been, you know, he has a huge business. His 2 brothers have like 4 trucks, and they are all doing so well. And I mean, given the opportunity to have a safe haven, will, you know, people will do miracles. I mean, we didn't come with anything, and when you see how much they achieve it in such a short time, I mean, that encourages you to let more people come. I have children that were like, I put them at Clarkston High, and they didn't know a word of English, and now they are doctors, and they are graduating at Emory with full scholarship. So these are the people that we bring into the country. People who just want a chance to survive and have a safe haven. I think America is doing a great job bringing, there are millions still there. We are not expecting everybody to come here, but at least, you know, welcome the ones that are here preaching to, you know, safety and human compassion and friendship.
we certainly, there are a lot of great organizations that are providing humanitarian service overseas, and you know, most of the refugees in the Horn of Africa are still there. They're still in that situation. But the ones that come here, they do build a new life, and they also provide support to their relatives back in the camp. Support that you can count on more than, you know, donor support. It's sustainable.
Yeah.
They're bringing resources back to the refugees that are still living in those camp environments.
You know, every month, most of the refugees go to, we have our own banking system because it's a warring country. You cannot go to Somalia and just go to Central Bank and send money transfer. We go through our own channels, and most of these people work, but they support maybe 20 family members in a camp or back home.
This is just a little bit about us, and if after this is over you want more information, we have a table of information package. But now we just want to hear from you. What questions do you have for Safia and I?
You mentioned Medicaid earlier.
Uh-huh.
We were actually just chatting about this. How are refugees automatically eligible for Medicaid and for some temporary period of time, or how does that work?
Yeah, so there's a special type of medical assistance that's provided from the Office of Refugee Resettlement. It's called Refugee Medical Assistance, and it's given in a block grant to each state where refugees are, and the state can kind of decide what form that it takes. So in Georgia, refugee medical assistance is the same as Medicaid for low-income families, and refugees are eligible for 8 months. We thought initially with healthcare reform that refugees would be eligible for longer, but now that Georgia has chosen not to participate, we're not actually sure how that's going to impact refugees long term, but we know that they will still have this 8 months of refugee medical assistance. We do really try to place people in jobs with health benefits. That's one of the things that we really look for in jobs, and it's not always possible, but we really do try most of the time. Thank you.
What about are there issues peculiar to Jews in Ethiopia, and is there any sort of Jewish presence in Somalia that is being persecuted and arriving?
Well, in Somalia we have what we call Hebrew. They are Jewish, but they have been in Somalia for centuries. They are part of our community. You sponsored a family who is from that ethnic group. I am not sure what their religion is. I never asked them if they are Jewish or Muslim, because they live in a Muslim country. I assume they are not going to say, I'm a Jewish. So we have a large number. They were approved to go to Israel like the Falasha in the 90s, just before Ziad Barre left the country. And unfortunately, the government was no longer in power, so they didn't go. But there is a large number of that community, and we have about 4, the family you sponsored, and another 3 families. Yeah. So they are processed out of Djibouti, and I was excited when I first found the first family. I'm like, oh my God, the first Hebrew family is coming. I mean, yeah.
As far as Jews out of Ethiopia, this is not an area where I have expertise, but I think we actually have a volunteer of RESA who knows a little bit about the subject, and because we thought people might be interested in this subject, since you're here, do you want to answer that question?
Sure. Can you repeat the question one more time? I didn't quite hear you.
Well, it has to do, are there issues that are peculiar to Jewish or Hebrew? I'm not quite sure what that distinction is in the Horn of Africa. I've heard that Ethiopia is the country that has really an ancient tradition of Jewish settlement there, or Hebrew settlement.
Do you mind walking up next to Safia?
Sure.
So if we might pick it up on the
Ethiopia in that part of Africa, there's still a lot of tribal lifestyles, and especially 30 years ago there was even more tribal lifestyles. So there are very, very old, very intact Jewish cultures inside Ethiopia, and during the Civil War, a lot of those Ethiopian Jews immigrated to Israel, and because, of course, since the creation of Israel after World War II, Jews are always welcomed to come into Israel, and it's a part of what makes it's very important to Israel to constantly have Jews coming there. So there are lots of Jews in Israel. During that civil war that was going on in Ethiopia, at one point, Ethiopia didn't want anybody immigrating from the country. They weren't having any problems, according to them. They wanted to kind of fix their own problems. So there was a project where they were where El Al Airlines, which is the Israeli airlines, for 36 hours, they took 50 some odd airplanes, and they were going back and forth shuttling Jews out of Ethiopia into Tel Aviv, which is like an 1.5 or 2 hour flight. In that 36 hours, they moved 14,000 people from Ethiopia into Israel. And another interesting thing is one of those airplanes, it was a El Al 747, and they put on 1,122 people on that flight. In that very short flight, 2 babies were born, and it's still the record for the largest number of people ever on a commercial flight. So it was
the Operation Solomon, 1991.
Yes, so it was a huge, huge project, Operation Solomon. Thank you. And so there are still a lot of Jews in Israel. There's a lot of positives, there's a lot of negatives, but there are a lot in Israel. There's still some in Ethiopia, of course, there's still a lot, but it's in a much more tribal environment.
Context. And what about in Somalia? Do you think of is there any sort of concentration of Jews in Somalia?
Mhm. We have a lot of Jewish history in my country. We have, they just found these caves in Somalia that everything was in Hebrew.
Oh.
So, you know, some Somalis claim that they originate from Israel and converted into Islam, and some are maybe practicing their religion, but nobody, we are not into religion in my country. Now we became all of a sudden Muslim, but you know, when I was growing up, I was, you know, I knew I was born Muslim, but I wasn't practicing Islam. It was open, it was, you know, if you are in Somalia or New York, there was no difference. I could wear miniskirt, I could do whatever. There were bars, there were, you know, churches. But since the war, people have changed it and became too religious because of the Muslims coming there to feed the people who need. When you are, you know, in a bad place, you tend to your God and, you know, want to think that if I'm good Muslim or good Christian, maybe God will relieve me from whatever I'm going through. So, you know, there are different religions. We have Christians in Somalia. It's not a big number. I have family members who are Christians. And I'm sure there are some Jewish, but we have all the history of Somalia. There are a lot of Jewish influence in there. So you know, we have the Hebrew, as I said. Some of them are practicing Islam. Some of them are maybe practicing their own religion.
But it would be in private.
Yeah, it's in private. Like
it's in private.
I was just looking at the pictures at the other room, and I saw Jewish falasha, Jewish Ethiopians, and they had a cross on their faces. And the description was like, because they were afraid, they were hiding to pretend that they are Christians. So some of those Jewish, because I remember as a child that we say, you never see a Hebrew body. I mean, when somebody dies, we didn't know what they do. So we believe that somebody comes and takes the body and God knows where they go. You know, because they were hiding what they were practicing. So, you know, there was a lot of communication between Israel and camps and the elders of the Jewish community in my country. In Djibouti, there are a lot of things going back and forth, and maybe Israel will resettle some of those Jewish.
But really, Hebrew is an archaic term, right? Americans are always going to say Jewish.
Yeah, it's called Hebrew.
It's if they're tribally Jewish, if it goes back that far.
Yeah.
But trust me, they're not openly practicing Judaism. And in Mogadishu, which Somalia, there's Somaliland, there's Somalia, but Mogadishu, which is the capital of Somalia, if you have been to Israel, if you have an Israeli stamp on your passport, you will not be granted entry into that country.
In my passport, in the Somali passport, you could not go to Israel.
Passport?
The State Department does not want anybody to go to Somalia for any reason whatsoever. You would have to be humanitarian cause or some sort of a military reason in the first place. The State Department does not agree. But so Americans really just don't go there. Now, if it's legal to go there, are there flights that go there that Americans could be on? Yes. Would anybody suggest it? Not necessarily.
Has the situation, political situation, improved since, what was it, 1993 when Mohammed Aidid, I think, was in power, and the disaster when they were dragging American soldiers through the Mogadishu.
We don't do that anymore.
And
We are pro-Americans now.
not only that, but that stopped America from intervening in many other places, including Rwanda.
I was there in '91 when Americans came. And people
So
were
are there movements, political movements that are trying to make people more amicable and tolerant and whatever, rather than killing each other?
We are trying
And
now.
what I'm thinking, what could cause all this other than the religion?
It's not
It's,
religion. We are all Muslims. We are all one ethnic group. We have the
Yeah.
same language, but we have some other sickness.
I mean,
we have tribes.
we see this happen in Haiti. We see this.
One of these are kind of consequence of the colonial regimes, and after post-colonial period, there was never settlement. There was always fighting, and of course those colonial forces or rulers wanted to go back, I guess. Rule again. So until that is dissolved, I think there will be no. And one more thing, you mentioned that when people ask you about Syrian refugees, you're saying we are waiting until see what happens. How long do you wait?
Well, it's this is a state.
60,000 people dead, died.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tragic situation. It is a tragic situation in Syria, and it's not, you know, it's the State Department's decision when they want to start resettling refugees from an area, and it's not ours, but it's, you know,
I know you can.
yeah, there's not much that we can do, but the situation in Syria is worsening, and I think we will see Syrian refugees resettle.
We see asylees already, Syrian asylees, and Egyptians too. You know, they come and we help them, but refugees, we have to wait until they host the countries.
I do think, you know, typically the United Nations waits until, especially in a situation, I mean, I think for a while they were very hopeful that the regime would fall in Syria, but it's not happening, and the pressure on Jordan has become very intense. And I think as the pressure continues on Jordan to absorb refugees, there will be negotiations. I mean, I do think that there's a certain point, because there have been situations where we've resettled people quickly because of the pressure of the neighboring country. Kosovo is a good example of that. When Kosovar refugees fled into Macedonia in massive numbers, we very quickly began resettling Kosovar Albanians in the United States. Very quickly. We didn't wait for that to become a protracted situation. And so there is a history of countries negotiating with the UN and with the U.S. government to make resettlement happen quicker. But typically, you know, they wait because the United Nations preference is a safe return, and when there is that glimmer of hope.
I noticed a couple of other countries that are probably, you know, alphabetical order, they're on top, Bhutan and Burma. I thought they didn't have any problems.
Well, Burmese, so both of those situations are what we would call like long-term protracted situations. So the Bhutanese are the ones that people are the most surprised, because everybody has heard about the index of happiness in Bhutan, and I think Bhutan is a great country. But the refugees coming out of, the Bhutanese refugees coming out of camps in Nepal fall into this category of stateless persons. So they're part of an ethnic group that settled in Bhutan 200 years ago, but they settled in a remote area and they retained their Nepali language and some Nepali culture. And you know, 20 or so years ago, the Bhutanese government began passing laws that you have to study in the language. You know, you can't do certain things. You can't speak the language, and just more and more laws that are trying to push this group out. In the Bhutanese government's view, these were Nepalis and they should be living in Nepal. Nepal's view is that they're Bhutanese and they should be living in Bhutan. So the long-term temporary solution was to put them in these refugee camps right over the border in Nepal, where the refugees didn't want to leave because they had real hopes of going home. And after 20 years, they finally started saying, I don't think we're going home. So the U.S. government negotiated with the Nepali government to resettle this group, and this is a stateless group. And the U.S. government's done that before. Another group they did that was with Mashkedian Turks, which was, you know, Russia said they're Turkish, Turkey said they're Russian. So this stateless group of people. And that's where the Bhutanese came in. The Burmese are mostly ethnic Chen and Karen that fled Burma, and they've been in camps for over a decade as well. Camps in Thailand are living in an urban environment in Malaysia. And these are persecuted ethnic minorities in Burma, or now known as Myanmar, who have also been in camps for forever.
I apologize for asking all these questions, but I hope...
No, I want you to ask questions, please.
There is one other thing that came to my mind, and from my own experience back, I'm from Bosnia originally. And when they all started coming here, I was one of the first to greet them, but unfortunately, very few of them went back, except older people when they died, they want to be buried there. I was thinking you should, you might have tried it, but you didn't think about it. Take this case and this evening, as we were talking, and similar evening, to different churches, different religious organizations, because they're mostly the ones that are causing problems. Not the church, but people who go to church. And what I think is that many of these people they don't know about Somalia. You mentioned here the anti-immigrant or anti-refugee sentiment. It will be worse because of the economic situation and everything. But when people see how these people live and who they are, give them a chance. Invite them to Clarkston. I'm going tomorrow, actually.
Okay. Good.
So eat whatever they serve, the samosa or whatever. But I think Americans are very basically compassionate people, except there are a lot of bad things happening to Americans by some other extremists somewhere else, and then they usually blame everybody who comes from there,
Yeah.
as if they're a part of it.
I think that I absolutely think that fear and of the unknown is our biggest enemy. And thank you for your point. I mean, that is exactly what we're.
And we give them a chance to practice what they preach. We go after all to church or whatever, synagogue or mosque, every week at least, maybe every day. And they talk to each other, but you have to talk to other people to see that they are not monsters.
May I say something? I mean, you are from Europe. I would rather be in America than Europe, because in America I don't feel I don't belong here. In Europe, I mean, I lived in Europe for 15 years. And then the first question that people ask is, when are you going back? And nobody asked me that. Nobody in America ever said to me, when are you going back home? I think Americans are nice people. I think they're welcome. They might be busy. Their two jobs are working for a car and a bigger house. But deep down they are really nice people.
I can explain that a little bit from what I've observed in these 40 years.
Yeah.
First of all, slaves came here, so they broke the boundaries and made themselves becoming American and fought for it. So it's easier for you now. When they see, I had a friend with whom I was working. He was a Sikh Indian. We were sharing office. He used to tell me, "You are so lucky. They don't know who you are. You look like them." But when he wears turban all the time, of course. And we were working on building nuclear power plant. So they used to call him Aladdin and what. So
They call me that
human
too, so it
prejudice,
doesn't
but
matter.
we have to all break it. We have to go and face it. And all these people, that I presume a lot of people here that came because they want to do something, and if nothing, they want to learn more, which is the first step. And if we continue working on that, but we shouldn't lose interest or courage to do something. I'm sorry, this way.
I have two questions. Earlier in your PowerPoint, you mentioned that most of your aid, of course, comes from, I guess, USAID or the U.S. government in some capacity. But you also said you all are seeking private funding and doing some of that. So my first question is, what percentage of your funding is coming from private resources, individuals, corporations, what have you? And then my second question is, in terms of the needs for your organization from a volunteer perspective, if you could say this is what we need most, what would you actually put on that list in terms of people who are interested perhaps in being a volunteer?
Okay.
And also in terms of sponsorship, what does that entail as well if you're sponsoring?
Sure. So first question is, what percentage of our funds are private? So 80% of our current funding is federal government funding, and we would like that pie to be a little bit smaller. We would like to get it to 70%. So the 20% that's coming in is a mixture of private foundation, church. We get a lot of in-kind support, a lot of in-kind support. Volunteers are are a huge part of what we do. And we have a lot of different volunteer opportunities, but some of our biggest push for volunteer opportunities now are in the area of education. So we have volunteer opportunities to tutor youth in our after-school program. We have a middle school after-school program. There's nothing to be afraid of. Middle school kids are not as scary as they seem. That was something I had to get over my fear. Wonderful, wonderful group of kids. We have a lot of women with small children who don't go to the ESL class because they don't have child care, so home-based ESL is a volunteer opportunity that we have. We have volunteer opportunities to help prepare people like Safia for the citizenship exam, doing some civics tutoring. So they're big volunteer opportunities that we have. We have volunteer opportunities in our office. We have a clothing closet there, so helping clients get clothes when they first arrive. Our waiting room is one of the busiest places you'll ever see, and so we have volunteer greeters that come in and help get people to where they need to be in our office and say hello and have a welcoming face. The big thing for us is we always want our office to be a happy and welcoming place. Our development director's here, so am I hitting everything?
You did all right.
Okay.
The blue folders in the back actually do have a new menu of both individual opportunities and group opportunities, and there's contact information in there, so I'd love for you all to take that. We're really looking at something that really re-energized this year is our volunteer program, and really looking to see how can we fill in sort of gaps in service with people, and in more ways than just, for example, helping stock the clothing closet. We've really found some ways to get people involved that are direct client service, and I think that, as Paedia mentioned, I mean, this is something that she got into because she learned so much from the people that she was serving, and I've seen that too. Zane, who got pulled right out
Volunteer
of the seat
of the year.
Exactly, you should have a medal. He came to us a year and a half ago and basically has been a full-time volunteer. Clients still have his cell phone number and are calling, and so there's a lot of really wonderful ways to get engaged.
But you also asked about our co-sponsorship model, and we're fortunate enough to have one of our co-sponsors here in the audience tonight. But our model, we partner with a lot of churches. Our co-sponsorship model is usually a church group, although it's opening up. We actually have a Girl Scouts troop co-sponsoring a family. But co-sponsors actually they help set up the apartments, meet the family at the airport, and are there for friendship and mentoring in the first 3 months that they're there. Our sponsorship groups provide a financial contribution as well to help us give more support to the family. And so they're really giving that, you know, our case managers work really hard to make sure we cover all the bases. If you're in ESL, you get your Georgia ID, you have your Social Security card, you got food, you got clothes. But it's the co-sponsors who really make people feel welcome, show them what Atlanta's all about, show them around, give them that kind of orientation. You know, that's how I got started as a volunteer. And one of the things, just helping them understand the mail and taking them to see that we're really focused on work. We have to be, but churches can take people to see what a wonderful city this is. And
be friends with the family. I mean, I think the best thing, I'm a refugee, so I know what when I came, if I had somebody who could say welcome and meet me and talk to me, because I lost everything. I lost my family, I lost my country, so I needed somebody to say welcome. You know, you can lean on me. I mean, you can volunteer and be friends with the family. I mean, it's not the dollars that counts. I think you need some emotional support coming here. We don't have time to go to mental health and whatever you went through, nobody talks to you. Sometimes I go to Paedia and just cry. I don't know why I'm crying. So, you know, having somebody and shoulder to cry is very important. I think none of you went through that, so maybe the Bosnian guy, but the rest of you.
And you don't have to be intimidated by language.
Yeah,
you
don't need a language.
I'm telling you, I don't speak any other languages, and it's gotten to the point where I don't know how I'll do it, but trust me, I'll get it done. You know, because
that is the most.
They call him than calling me.
So interesting as a volunteer, because that was the thing that I was terrified when I started volunteering with the family I was working with, because I never had an interpreter. I just walked in one day, you know, and I hope they knew who I was. But I hope somebody told them I was coming. It worked out okay. So. But I found, like, really early on, if two people want to communicate, you know, they will. And if you are willing to make a fool of yourself, it goes a long way into making someone else feel comfortable. And I was totally willing to make a fool of myself, so it worked out well. But I just, over time, can't believe the amount of things I learned about that family and the amount of things that we did together before they could talk to me in English. It really was amazing, and you know, something I recommend for everybody. Don't be intimidated by that. Any other questions?
I was thinking, you said it takes 3 months that you work with refugees when they come here or when they come to you. So during those 3 months, you have to teach them English, all of
Yeah,
them
that's a good,
and find a job.
it's a very good question. You actually raise a good point.
And in Canada, by the way, government sponsors 6 months to a year.
Well, actually, the government here sponsors for longer than 3 months too. There's this kind of artificial 3-month line. I have never met a refugee family that we only worked with for 3 months. But the State Department funds us to provide some specific services in the first 3 months. But then there is another program that starts for the next 3 months. That is, yeah. So it's the first. Usually, people have financial assistance from us. It's an average of 5 months, but it's up to 6 months. But it doesn't stop. You know, there's something magic that happens in that 6 months where they don't come back. Most refugee resettlement agencies are included. We go out and raise funds to provide services long term. So we continue to see clients up to 5 years. And clients don't learn English in 3 months. We enroll them in English classes. They probably attend those classes for a much longer period of time. But, you know, we provide very intensive case management support for the first 3 months and very intensive employment support for the second 3 months. Once people are working, they can come in and for anything, for health, for you know, home management, financial literacy, referrals, questions about their utilities. Immigration. They come in for immigration services, apply for families.
Applying for their families, applying for green cards. You know, we help them with their citizenship, you know, when they want to naturalize. So we don't just let them go and say, hey, we are done with you. They come, whatever their needs are, whether it's financial support. We might not have all the funds, but there are cases that we came and death happens, things happen, accidents happen. So they come and we still provide support and case funds for them.
And we have a new program that I always plug. I really love this program. It's a savings match program where we match dollar for dollar up to $4,000 per family for families that want to buy a home, start a business, purchase a car, or go to school. And families can come back for that service up to 3 years. So we try to, and we have a youth program as well. So we try to have a continuum of service up to 5 years. But there's So that 90 days is a State Department time frame, but I haven't really ever met a resettlement agency that only works with people for 90 days.
And I'm doing a program services to older refugees that has no expiration on time. It's up until citizenship.
Well, maybe we can conclude and talk a little more informally. A number of you arrived late, so you have no idea who I am, but I want to thank you all for this incredible, inspiring talk. My name is Elizabeth Peterson, and I curated the show here, so there are many more lectures that are happening in conjunction with this, and I would love for you to come back, and I think I want to volunteer for Risa. I'm very inspired. This is really inspiring.